The engagement ring slipped from my fingers before I even realized I had taken it off. It spun across the polished table and stopped right in front of my boyfriend. For a second, nobody in the restaurant breathed. His mother froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. His younger sister stared at me with wide eyes. The waiter awkwardly stepped backward, pretending he hadn't seen anything. My boyfriend looked at the ring, then at me. "Emily," he whispered, "what are you doing?" I smiled. Not because I was happy, because if I didn't smile, I was going to cry. "I'm tired," I said quietly, "tired of chasing you." The silence around the table became unbearable. 6 years, 6 birthdays. 6 Christmases, 6 anniversaries. 6 years of loving a man who somehow always made me feel like I was asking for too much just for wanting to feel chosen. Everyone thought tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. They had no idea that 20 minutes earlier, I had made the hardest decision I'd ever made. And it all started with a single message. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm 30 years old, and until that night, I truly believed I was about to marry the love of my life." People always said we were the perfect couple. They saw the vacations, the matching Halloween costumes, the smiling photos on Instagram. What they never saw was that I spent 6 years feeling like I was always walking behind him, hoping that one day he'd finally turn around and notice I was still there. They also never knew that every time someone asked when we were getting married, I already had my answer. I was just waiting for him to have his, and that was my biggest mistake. I should have seen the warning signs long before that night. The truth is, they were never hidden. I just kept giving them kinder explanations because I loved him. His name was Ryan Mitchell. We met 6 years earlier at a charity fundraiser in Columbus, Ohio. I was 24, working my first full-time job as a preschool teacher, while he had just started building his career as a financial analyst. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charming in the way movies make men charming. He was calm, quiet, reliable, at least that's what I believed. Our first date lasted nearly 5 hours. We walked through downtown until every coffee shop had closed. We talked about childhood dreams, favorite movies, and the families we hoped to build one day. When he walked me to my car, he smiled and said, "I've never talked to someone this easily before." I drove home convinced I just met my future husband, looking back now. I think I met the man I wanted him to become, not the man he actually was. The first year felt almost perfect. He texted every morning. He remembered little things about me. He brought me soup when I got sick. He never forgot my birthday. From the outside, we looked happy. Inside the relationship, something tiny always felt missing. Whenever we were alone together, everything felt normal, but the moment other people showed up, I disappeared. At his friend's birthday party, he'd spend hours talking to everyone else while I stood near the snack table pretending to scroll through my phone. Whenever I walked over, he'd smile politely, answer whatever I asked, then turn right back to the conversation he was already having. No introductions, no hand on my shoulder. No, "Hey guys, this is Emily." It happened so often that eventually I started introducing myself. His family gatherings were even harder. The first Thanksgiving I spent with them should have been exciting. Instead, Ryan disappeared into the living room with his cousins less than 10 minutes after we arrived. I stood in the kitchen smiling awkwardly while complete strangers looked at me with the same confused expression. One of his aunts finally asked, "So, how do you know Ryan?" I laughed. "I've been dating him for almost 2 years. Her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, I thought you were one of the neighbors." That hurt more than I admitted, not because of what she said, but because Ryan hadn't mentioned me once. On the drive home that night, I quietly asked, "Could you stay with me a little more next time?" He kept his eyes on the road. "You were doing fine, I know, but I didn't know anyone. You need to be more independent, Em." That sentence stayed with me because every time I needed him, I somehow ended up feeling guilty for asking. I convinced myself every relationship had flaws. Maybe I was too emotional, maybe I expected too much. Maybe movies had filled my head with unrealistic expectations, so I stayed quiet for another year, then another, and another. Each time I promised myself things would improve. Each time I became the one making excuses. If he forgot date night, he must be stressed. If he canceled plans, work is probably overwhelming. If he barely spoke to me at family events, he's just comfortable around them. There was always a reason, always another chance, always hope. Love can make you incredibly patient, sometimes far more patient than you should ever be. 3 years into our relationship, my best friend Sarah finally said something I'd never forget. We were having brunch when she suddenly asked, "Emily, Can I ask you something without you getting mad? I laughed. Go ahead. When was the last time Ryan planned something just because he knew it would make you happy? I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. I honestly couldn't remember. Sarah didn't say, you should leave him. She simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You deserve someone who chooses you without being asked. At the time, I defended him. Today, I wish I had listened. 3 months after Sarah asked me that question, my dad died. There isn't a graceful way to write that sentence. One day he was calling me to argue about which football team would finally make the playoffs. 2 days later, I was standing beside a hospital bed, holding a hand that would never squeeze mine again. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks into ordinary moments. You'll reach for your phone because you want to tell your dad something funny. Then remember, you hear a song he loved. You drive past his favorite diner. You smell his aftershave on an old jacket you forgot was hanging in your closet, and every single time, it feels like losing him all over again. Ryan came to the funeral. He wore a black suit. He hugged me. He said all the right words. I'm here for you. I'll help you through this. You don't have to do this alone. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because when someone loses a parent, you find out very quickly who truly shows up. The first couple of weeks weren't terrible. He called every night. He checked in. He even surprised me with dinner one evening because he knew I hadn't eaten. I remember thinking, maybe this tragedy would bring us closer. Maybe I'd been too hard on him. Maybe people really do grow when life gets difficult. I couldn't have been more wrong. About a month later, everything slowly went back to normal. Normal for Ryan anyway, not for me. Grief doesn't disappear after 30 days. It doesn't care that everyone else has gone back to work. Some mornings I couldn't even convince myself to get out of bed. I'd sit on my kitchen floor drinking cold coffee because making another cup felt like too much effort. One evening I called him. I've had a really bad day. What happened? I kept hearing Dad's voicemail. There was a pause, then he sighed. You really need to stop listening to those. I stared at the phone. I know, it just makes you sad. I know. So, stop. That was it. No. Do you want me to come over? No. I'm sorry you're hurting. Just stop. I told myself he didn't know what grief felt like. His parents were alive. Maybe he simply didn't understand. So once again, I made excuses for him. 2 months later was my birthday. It was the first birthday without my dad calling at exactly 7:00 a.m. I cried before I even got out of bed. Ryan texted around noon. Happy birthday read. That was sweet. Then he called. So, are you still coming over? I frowned. I thought maybe we'd celebrate somewhere closer to my apartment. There was silence. My reservation is already near my place. I looked at the GPS. 2 hours away, 2 hours there, 2 hours back on my birthday, the one birthday I was already dreading. Ryan, I'm really exhausted. I know, but I already planned everything. I waited. Surely he'd realize what he was asking. He didn't, so I drove 4 hours on the road because saying no somehow made me feel like I was the difficult one. The entire drive, one question kept repeating in my head. If he loved me, why was I always the one making the sacrifice? I didn't have an answer, not yet. The dinner itself was beautiful. At least that's what everyone looking from the outside would have thought. Ryan had reserved a table at a rooftop restaurant overlooking downtown Columbus. The skyline glowed in the distance, soft music played through hidden speakers, and every table was filled with couples celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, or engagements. He had remembered my favorite pasta. He had even ordered the chocolate lava cake I always joked I'd eat as my last meal if I ever had the chance. Anyone watching us would have called him the perfect boyfriend, but love isn't measured by expensive dinners. It's measured by the little moments no one else sees. When the waiter brought out my birthday dessert, he smiled at Ryan instead of me. She told us it was your idea, the waiter said. That was thoughtful. Ryan nodded with a proud smile. I forced one of my own because the truth was, I'd planned almost everything. I'd picked the restaurant weeks earlier. I'd sent him the menu. I'd even reminded him to make the reservation after he forgot the first time. I wasn't celebrating my birthday. I was watching him get credit for my effort. A few weeks later, his cousin Jake invited everyone to a family barbecue. I almost didn't go. Work had been exhausting, and emotionally I still wasn't myself after losing Dad. But Ryan wanted me there, or at least, that's what I assumed. The moment we arrived, he hugged his cousins, laughed with his uncles, and disappeared into the backyard without saying a word to me. I stood by the patio door holding the bowl of potato salad I'd made. No introductions, no come meet everyone, nothing. One of his older cousins noticed me standing alone. "You okay?" he asked kindly. I smiled. "Yeah, just looking for Ryan." He glanced around. "I think he's playing cornhole with everyone." "Has he been out there long?" The cousin looked confused. "About 40 minutes. 40 minutes. He hadn't looked for me once." I found him laughing so hard that tears were rolling down his face. For one brief second, I waited for him to notice me. He didn't. I walked over anyway. "Hey." "Oh, hey, that was it." Then he turned back to the game. I stood there for another minute before quietly walking away. No one stopped me. His grandmother found me sitting alone on the front porch. She lowered herself into the chair beside mine with a gentle smile. "First serious relationship?" she asked. I laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" She nodded. "Can I tell you something my husband taught me? Please, if someone truly loves having you in their life, they'll look for you in every room." I looked down at my hands. She continued. "You should never have to wonder where you belong." I felt tears burning behind my eyes because for 6 years, I'd been wondering exactly that. On the drive home, I finally said what I'd been swallowing for years. "Do you know how many times you checked on me today?" He kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know." "0, he sighed. "Emily, no, just answer me." He stayed silent. I spent almost an hour alone. "You could have come over." "I did. You barely looked at me." His grip tightened on the steering wheel. I was spending time with my family, and I'm not part of that after 6 years. The car became painfully quiet. Finally, he muttered, "I think you're making this into a bigger issue than it is." Those words hit harder than I expected, because that's exactly what he'd said, every single time. Whenever I felt hurt, I was too sensitive. Whenever I wanted more effort, I was overthinking. Whenever I asked to feel included, I was making a big deal out of nothing. For the first time in 6 years, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if the problem wasn't that he didn't understand me? What if he simply didn't think my feelings mattered? That question stayed in my head for weeks. What if he understood exactly how I felt, and just didn't think it was important enough to change? I hated myself for even thinking it, because admitting that meant admitting something else. Maybe I wasn't waiting for him to become a better partner. Maybe I was waiting for him to become a different person. Life went on. I buried myself in work. Teaching preschool was the only place where I didn't feel invisible. Every morning, 20 tiny voices would run toward me. "Miss Emily, look what I drew. Can you help me?" Children have a funny way of making you feel needed. They don't pretend. If they love you, they show it. If they miss you, they tell you. There are no games, no guessing, no wondering where you stand. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, why does a room full of 4-year-olds make me feel more appreciated than the man I've loved for 6 years? One Friday afternoon, my coworker Melissa leaned against my classroom door after the kids had gone home. "You've been quiet lately." I smiled. "I'm just tired." She folded her arms. "No, you're heartbroken." The words caught me off guard. "What makes you say that? You smile with everyone." She paused. "But your eyes look exhausted." I laughed awkwardly. "I guess I'm just stressed." Melissa didn't push. Instead, she asked one simple question. "When was the last time your boyfriend made your life easier?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She nodded. "That's what I thought." A month later, Ryan called me on a Tuesday evening. "My parents are having everyone over Saturday." "Okay, you'll come, right?" "Of course." I waited. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe after our last conversation, he'd actually make an effort. Maybe he'd stay close. Maybe he'd introduce me properly. Maybe he'd remember I was his partner. I kept building hope out of almost nothing. Saturday arrived. I drove nearly 2 hours to his parents' house. As soon as I parked, Ryan kissed my cheek. "I'm glad you're here." Those 5 words filled me with more hope than they should have. Maybe today really would be different. We walked inside together. His mother hugged me warmly. His father shook my hand. Within 5 minutes, Ryan disappeared. Again, no warning, no come with me, no glance over his shoulder. He was just gone. I stood in the middle of the living room, holding my drink while conversations formed around me. His cousins gathered near the television. His uncles were outside grilling burgers. His sister was showing vacation pictures to everyone, and I was standing completely alone, not because his family was unfriendly. Actually, they were incredibly kind. His aunt walked over first. "Emily, sweetheart, come sit with us." For the next half hour, they included me in every conversation. They asked about work. They remembered stories I'd told months earlier. They laughed at my terrible jokes. At one point, I looked across the backyard. Ryan was laughing with his cousins. He hadn't looked in my direction once, not once. It hit me then. His family, people I'd only met a handful of times each year, made more effort to include me than my own boyfriend ever did. That realization hurt more than being ignored. Because it proved he was capable of noticing people, he just never seemed to notice me. Later that evening, everyone gathered for a family photo. Someone shouted, "Ryan, Emily." "Get over here," I walked toward the group. Ryan was already standing beside his brother. Without thinking, I moved next to him. He stepped to the other side to make room for someone else. A tiny movement, barely noticeable. No one else reacted, but I felt it. I suddenly found myself standing at the edge of the photo instead of beside the man I'd spent 6 years loving. The camera flashed, everyone smiled. Looking at that picture later, you'd never know my heart was breaking. I didn't say anything on the drive home, not because I wasn't hurt. Because I was exhausted. There comes a point in every relationship where you stop arguing, not because everything is okay, but because you're tired of explaining why you're hurting. Ryan noticed my silence about 20 minutes into the drive. "You're quiet." I kept my eyes on the highway. "I'm thinking." "About what?" I let out a slow breath. "Do you know what the saddest part of today was?" He glanced at me. "What?" "Your family made me feel like I belonged." He frowned. "Isn't that a good thing?" "It is." I looked at him. "But you didn't." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned up the radio. That hurt more than any argument ever could. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan's grandmother. "It was wonderful seeing you yesterday. Don't be a stranger, sweetheart." I smiled despite everything. Then another message came. "Can I tell you something?" "An old woman has good instincts," I replied. "Of course." A few seconds later, 3 little dots appeared, then her message arrived. "Never spend your life begging someone to make room for you. The right person already saves you a seat." I stared at those words for a long time. She didn't know everything. She had only seen tiny pieces of our relationship, yet somehow she saw me more clearly than Ryan did. That night, I decided to stop chasing, not dramatically, not to play games. I simply wanted to see what would happen if I stopped being the one who always reached first, so I didn't text him good morning. I didn't ask about his day. I didn't send him funny videos. I didn't suggest dinner. I just waited. 1 day passed. Nothing. 2 days. Nothing. 3 days. Still nothing. On the 4th evening, my phone finally rang. "Hey," Ryan said casually. "Hey, you've been kind of quiet." I almost laughed. Kind of quiet? I'd disappeared for 4 days, and that was all he'd noticed. "I've been waiting to see if you'd reach out first." There was a pause. "I figured you were busy." I wasn't. Another silence. Then he said something I'd never forget. "I just don't think about texting as much as you do." My heart sank, because that wasn't the problem. The problem was, he didn't think about me as much as I thought about him. There was a difference, a huge one. A week later, Sarah invited me over for dinner. The moment she opened the door, she looked at my face and sighed. "It got worse, didn't it?" I nodded. She handed me a cup of tea before I even answered. We sat on her couch in complete silence for a minute. Finally, she asked, "Emily, if your future daughter came to you one day and described her relationship exactly the way you've described yours," she leaned forward, "what would you tell her?" The answer came out before I could stop it. "I'd tell her she deserves better." Sarah didn't smile. She simply asked, "So why doesn't Emily deserve better too?" I had no answer, because deep down, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid that 6 years of loving someone would end with me admitting that love alone had never been enough. Sarah's question followed me home. "Why doesn't Emily deserve better too?" I repeated it in my head while brushing my teeth, while folding laundry, while driving to work, while standing in the grocery store trying to decide between 2 brands of coffee. It refused to leave me alone, because for the first time in years, I didn't have an excuse. The following weekend, Ryan invited me to meet him for lunch. I almost said no, not because I wanted to punish him, because I genuinely didn't have the energy anymore, but I went. Old habits are hard to break. When I arrived, he was already sitting at our usual table. He smiled. Hey, he stood up and hugged me. For a brief second, I let myself believe things might finally change. Maybe he'd noticed the distance between us. Maybe he wanted to talk. Maybe he sat back down and started talking about work. His new project, his manager, his coworkers. Nearly 30 minutes passed. He never once asked how I was, not once. I quietly stirred my iced tea, waiting. Nothing. Finally, I interrupted him. Ryan, how do you think I've been doing lately? He looked confused. I don't know. You tell me. He leaned back in his chair. You seem fine. I smiled sadly. That's your answer? You've been a little quiet. Anything else? He shrugged. I guess not. I looked out the restaurant window. He had no idea, not because I hid it well. Because he had stopped looking a long time ago. That evening, I opened my closet to put away my jacket. A small shoebox fell from the top shelf. Inside were old movie tickets, birthday cards, photos from our first vacation. a tiny seashell he'd picked up during our trip to Lake Michigan. I sat on the bedroom floor surrounded by 6 years of memories. Every picture told the same story. I was always looking at him, smiling at him, reaching for him in almost every photo. He was looking somewhere else. I don't know why I'd never noticed before, maybe because I wasn't ready to. The next morning I called my mom. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart." We talked about work, the weather, her garden. Then she suddenly asked, "How are things with Ryan?" I hesitated. Too long, a mother always notices. "Emily, are you happy?" Tears instantly filled my eyes. I couldn't answer. Because I honestly didn't know anymore. I loved him. That part had never changed. But happiness had quietly slipped away months ago, maybe years. Mom spoke gently. "You know what your father used to tell me?" "What?" "A marriage isn't built by the person who loves the hardest." She paused. "It's built by two people who never stop choosing each other." I closed my eyes. Dad used to say that all the time. I'd forgotten, or maybe I'd been trying to. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I walked into the living room and opened my laptop. Without really thinking, I typed 4 words into Google. "Why do I feel lonely in my relationship?" Hundreds of articles appeared, then one title caught my attention. "Signs you're stuck in an anxious, avoidant relationship cycle." I clicked it. As I read each paragraph, my heart started racing. One partner constantly seeks reassurance, the other pulls away whenever emotions become too intense, one keeps chasing. The other keeps creating distance. Neither person feels understood, neither person feels safe. It felt like someone had been secretly watching our relationship for 6 years. I spent the next 3 hours reading everything I could find. Videos, articles, personal stories. For the first time, my relationship finally made sense. But understanding it didn't make it hurt any less, because every article ended with the same sentence. This cycle only changes if both partners are willing to recognize it and do the work together. I stared at those words until sunrise, then I made a decision. For the last 6 years, I'd been trying to save our relationship by myself. Now, it was Ryan's turn to decide whether he wanted to save it with me. The next evening, I spent almost 2 hours rewriting a single message. Delete, rewrite, delete again. Every version sounded either too angry or too desperate. I didn't want to blame him. I didn't want to beg him for the first time in 6 years. I just wanted him to understand. When I finally hit send, this is what I wrote. "Ryan, I love you more than I've ever been able to put into words, but I'm exhausted. I feel like I've spent years chasing you, asking for attention, asking to be included, asking to feel important. I don't want to keep living like this. I need to know if you still want to fight for us, because I can't keep fighting alone." I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter, then I waited. 5 minutes, nothing. An hour, nothing. By bedtime, still nothing. The next morning, I checked my phone before I even got out of bed. No reply. I told myself he was probably busy. At lunch, nothing. That evening, nothing. 24 hours had passed. The man who claimed he loved me hadn't found 30 seconds to answer the most vulnerable message I'd ever sent him. By the second day, my mind had become my worst enemy. Maybe I'd been too dramatic. Maybe I should have called instead. Maybe I should apologize. That last thought stopped me cold. Apologize for telling the truth? I stared at my phone. My thumb hovered over his name. Every instinct told me to text him. "Did you see my message? Are you okay? Can we talk?" That was the old Emily, the one who always chased. The one who always reached first. I locked my phone and placed it back on the table. No, not this time. That evening, Sarah called. "Any word from him?" "No." She was quiet for a second. "Emily." Silence is an answer too. I hated hearing that, because I knew she was right. Late that night, just as I was giving up hope, my phone buzzed. My heart pounded. "Ryan." I opened the message immediately. There was only one character. That was it, a question mark. "No, what do you mean?" "No, can we talk?" "No, I'm sorry you feel that way. Just..." I read it over and over. 6 years together, reduced to a single punctuation mark. I felt tears running down my face before I even realized I was crying. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Then I remembered something Ryan's grandmother had told me months earlier. "Never spend your life begging someone to make room for you." I slowly put my phone down. If he truly wanted to understand, he would ask. If he truly cared, he would call. For once, I wasn't going to chase him. The next morning came, then another, still nothing. No phone call, no explanation. No attempt to understand why the woman he'd spent 6 years with had reached her breaking point. At work, I smiled for the children. I laughed with my coworkers, but every time my phone vibrated, my heart skipped a beat. It was never him. On the third evening, I walked into my apartment, kicked off my shoes, and finally whispered the words I'd been too afraid to say out loud. "Maybe it's already over," the room answered with silence, and somehow, that silence hurt less than the one Ryan had given me, 3 days. That was how long Ryan stayed silent after sending me a single question mark. By the fourth morning, something inside me had changed. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even crying. I was just tired, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix, the kind that settles deep in your chest after carrying a relationship by yourself for far too long. Saturday morning, I woke up before my alarm. For the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone. I made coffee, opened the windows, let the cool September air fill my apartment. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful. That scared me because if being alone felt more peaceful than being in my relationship, what did that say about the relationship? Around 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Ryan. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Hello, hey." His voice sounded completely normal, too normal, as if we hadn't spent the last week drifting further apart. "How are you?" he asked. I almost laughed. How was I? I'd poured my heart out to him. He ignored me for days, and now, he wanted small talk. "I'm okay." "Good." A long silence followed. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, my cousins are meeting at Easton Mall later. You can come if you want." That was it. No mention of my message, no apology. "No, can we talk about us?" He was inviting me to the mall, like nothing had happened. I closed my eyes. For 6 years, this was exactly what he did, whenever things became uncomfortable. He pretended they never happened. "Ryan, yeah, did you read what I sent you?" Another pause. "Yeah, and I don't really know what you want me to say." I felt my heart sink. "I wanted you to tell me whether our relationship matters enough to fight for." "It does, but you didn't say anything." "I didn't think texting was the right place." "Then why didn't you call?" Silence. Again, that endless, exhausting silence. Finally, he spoke. "If you want to talk, we can talk when you get here. Not, I'll come to you, not, let's meet somewhere halfway." He still expected me to make the 2-hour drive. I looked around my apartment, at the framed photo of my dad, at the empty coffee cup beside the sink, at the engagement ring magazine I'd bought months earlier, hidden beneath a stack of books. I suddenly realized something. Every major decision in our relationship had always required me to move. Emotionally, physically, mentally. Ryan simply waited. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. "Okay, see you if you come." The call ended. "No, I love you." "No, I'm sorry." Nothing. I sat on my couch for nearly an hour, staring at the blank television. Then Sarah called. "You sound different." "I think I'm done." She didn't celebrate. She didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, she asked, "What happened?" I told her everything, the phone call, the mall. The complete lack of emotion. When I finished, she sighed softly. "Emily, can I ask you one last question?" I smiled sadly. "Go ahead. If your father were sitting beside you right now, what do you think he'd tell you to do?" I didn't even have to think. The answer came instantly. My dad would have looked me straight in the eye and said, "Never beg someone to love you the way you deserve to be loved." Tears rolled down my cheeks, not because I was confused anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't. I stood up, walked into my bedroom, opened the top drawer of my dresser. Inside was a small velvet box. The engagement ring I'd secretly bought for Ryan 3 weeks earlier. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, then quietly slipped it into my purse. If today really was the end. There was one thing I needed to do. I wasn't walking away with unanswered questions. I was going to look him in the eyes and finally ask the question I'd been avoiding for 6 long years. "Did you ever truly choose me, or was I just the one who never stopped choosing you?" I grabbed my car keys, locked my apartment door behind me, and started the 2-hour drive that would change both of our lives forever. The drive to Easton Mall felt longer than it ever had before. For 2 hours, I rehearsed every version of the conversation in my head. One version ended with him apologizing. Another ended with us crying in each other's arms. The darkest version ended with me walking away forever. I didn't know which one was waiting for me, but for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't driving there to save our relationship. I was driving there to find out if there was anything left to save. Ryan was exactly where he said he'd be, outside the bookstore, hands in his pockets, scrolling through his phone. When he looked up and saw me, he smiled like we were meeting for an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Hey. He stepped forward as if he was going to hug me. I instinctively took a small step back. His smile faded. "You okay?" I looked at him for several seconds. "Do I look okay?" He didn't answer. We walked through the mall in complete silence. People laughed around us. Children ran past carrying shopping bags, a couple walked by holding hands. I couldn't remember the last time Ryan had reached for mine without me doing it first. Finally, I stopped walking. "We're not shopping today," he looked confused. "I know. No, Ryan, we're talking." His shoulders tensed. "Okay." We found a quiet bench near the indoor fountain. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then I took a deep breath. "I need you to listen," he nodded. "I have been asking for the same things for 6 years. I've asked you to include me. I've asked you to check on me. I've asked you to make me feel like your partner. My words have changed over the years, but the pain hasn't." Ryan stared down at the floor. "I know," I blinked. "What?" "I know. You know," he nodded slowly. "I've always known." Those 4 words hit me harder than anything he'd ever said. You knew I was hurting, and you still let me feel that way." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I never wanted to hurt you, but every time things got emotional, I shut down. I thought if I stayed quiet, the problem would disappear." I felt tears filling my eyes. "It never disappeared, Ryan. It just became mine to carry. For the first time since we'd met," Ryan cried, not loudly, not dramatically. A single tear rolled down his face before he quickly wiped it away. "I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever been the boyfriend you deserved. I wanted those words to fix everything, 6 years ago. They probably would have. Today, they weren't enough." I reached into my purse. Ryan watched as I placed the small velvet box on the bench between us. His face went completely pale. "Emily, I bought this 3 weeks ago." His breathing became uneven. "I was going to propose." He looked at the box, then back at me. "You were." I nodded. "I kept thinking, if we got engaged, maybe we'd finally feel like a team." A broken laugh escaped my lips. "Instead, I realized I've been fighting for this relationship by myself." Ryan covered his face. "I had no idea." I looked at him with tears in my eyes. "That's the problem. You never had any idea, because you stopped looking." A long silence settled between us. Finally, Ryan spoke. "I don't want to lose you." I asked the one question I'd carried in my heart for years. "Then tell me honestly, are you afraid of losing me, or are you afraid of losing the life you've become comfortable with?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. That silence gave me my answer. I slowly stood up. "I love you, Ryan. I probably always will, but love isn't supposed to feel lonely." I picked up the velvet ring box and slipped it back into my purse. Ryan reached for my hand. "Please, don't leave like this." I looked at him one last time. "For 6 years, I kept chasing you. If you truly want a future with me, it's your turn to take the first step." Without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't know if he'd follow me. I didn't look back. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't chasing him anymore. I was finally giving him the chance to decide whether he was willing to chase the woman who had never stopped choosing him. Ryan didn't run after me that day, and strangely, I was glad he didn't. For the first time in 6 years, the decision wasn't mine to make. If he wanted a future with me, he had to prove it, not with words, but with actions. 3 days passed, then a week. I focused on work, spent weekends with my mom, and slowly started feeling like myself again. One Saturday morning, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Ryan was standing there. He wasn't holding flowers, he wasn't carrying a ring, instead he held a folder. "I made an appointment," he said quietly. I frowned. "For what?" "Couples therapy." "If you'll still come with me." He looked exhausted. "I've also booked individual therapy for myself. I finally understand that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo 6 years of making you feel alone." For the first time, I believed him. Not because of what he said, because of what he'd already done. For once, he had taken the first step. Therapy wasn't magical. Some sessions ended in tears, some ended in silence. There were days I wanted to quit. There were days he wanted to quit, but neither of us walked away. Ryan learned something about himself that changed everything. Whenever conflict appeared, he shut down because that's how he'd survived growing up. Ignoring emotions had always felt safer than facing them. It wasn't an excuse. But it finally explained the man I'd spent 6 years trying to understand. I also learned something about myself. After losing my father, I became terrified of losing anyone else. That fear made me hold on to a relationship long after I should have spoken up. We both had wounds. For the first time, we were healing them together instead of hurting each other. Over the next year, I noticed little changes. Ryan started reaching for my hand first. At family gatherings, he'd walk over every few minutes just to check on me. If someone started talking to him for too long, he'd smile and say, "Excuse me, I want to go see how Emily's doing." It sounds like such a small thing, but to me, it meant everything. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing him, he was choosing me, every single day. Almost a year later, Ryan asked me to take a walk through the same park where we'd had our first date. We stopped beside the lake just before sunset. He smiled nervously. "You know, I had this whole speech planned." I laughed. "Of course you did." He reached into his coat pocket, this time. It wasn't my ring, it was his. He got down on one knee. With tears in his eyes, he said, "Emily, I can't change the man I was 6 years ago, but I can promise you something. For the rest of my life, you will never have to wonder whether you're chosen. Will you marry me?" I couldn't stop crying. Not because everything had been perfect, because we'd finally learned how to fight for each other, instead of against each other. I nodded. "Yes, today as I'm writing this." We've been married for almost 2 years. Do we still argue? Of course. Do we still have difficult days? Absolutely. But there's one thing that's completely different now. I never have to chase him. If I'm quiet, he notices. If I'm hurting, he asks. If we're in a crowded room, he still looks around until he finds me. Then he smiles, just to make sure I know I'm not standing there alone. And every single time, I smile back, because after everything we survived, we finally learned the simplest truth about love. The right relationship isn't about one person chasing the other. It's about two people choosing each other again and again, every single day.